Many of you are familiar with a basketball player by the name of LeBron James. LeBron James has such high expectations coming out of high school, it seemed unreal that he would even attain half of the goals that people were setting out for him. But LeBron James did a very good job of managing expectations. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you some ideas of how to manage your expectations for others, expectations set on you, and, maybe expectations that you have for yourself. Stay tuned. Let's get started. Many of us have high expectations of people around us, people that are close to us, people that we love. But what we're often unaware of is the high level of expectation, the impact that it's having on this person emotionally or mentally. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you some ideas and 5 tips to help you manage expectations in all 3 levels: yourself, those that are placed on you, and those that you place on others. So these tips will apply for all of these, okay? So we're going to get right into it. So the first thing you have to do when managing expectations is you have to evaluate the expectation. Is this realistic, right? Is this something that you can realistically expect out of this person? And sometimes the only thing you have to go on is the history involved with this person. For example, if you're a high school teacher and you have a student who has not reviewed their work the entire year, you get into the 4th quarter and you still are expecting the student to do what you're asking them to do, then maybe you're setting a little bit too high of an expectation for that student in that moment. Now, I'm not saying you have to treat every student like that, because it could be another student who you've often been able to get to listen. They're just not consistent. So maybe your expectation to this student is, hey, you can do it. And that student performs, but not all the students are. So when you are evaluating your expectations, you have to really look at the situation. You have to see, is it realistic? Most of the times, can it happen? Yes. You have that expectation on that person because you believe it can happen. But will it happen? Is it realistic for it to happen? That's what you have to evaluate. You have to evaluate, okay, is this realistic for me? Is this realistic for that person? Okay? So, but there's nothing wrong with having expectations. I think a lot of people hear the word expectations and they think, well, I'm just not supposed to have expectations of you. Well, or you're common in marriages, the spouse may say, well, you have so many expectations. There's nothing wrong with expectations. What's wrong with expectations is when you're disappointed in those expectations, or they don't become realized and that person doesn't do what you expect them to do, and it impacts you heavily emotionally and mentally. That's when these expectations become problematic, because now it's having an emotional and mental impact on you. And that is where you have to go back and you have to adjust. So you have to first make sure that that is realistic. So you also have to take some time. Step number 2, you have to take some time to evaluate what you really want out of a person. What is it that you really want out of this person? What is your end goal, right? So going back to the teacher example, okay? Teacher, do you really want this student to have an A in their class? Do you want this student to pass the class? Or do you want this student to get a higher grade because you want to see that for the student? So you really have to evaluate what it is that you want out of that person or yourself. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, after you're done evaluating, you now have to find areas where you can be flexible with this person or with yourself. So if, going back to the example of the student all year, you have to kind of be flexible a little bit with that student to allow them some ways that can help them, right? Because if you stay rigid and you remain rigid, it's not going to help that student. So you have to find those areas where you can be flexible in. So For example, say you're telling all your students, and I don't know how it works as a teacher, I'm just using a student example. But say you have all your students and, you tell all your students, hey, you're going to turn in your assignment at 3 o'clock today. But you have this one student and you might be like, okay, all right, I'll let you turn yours in a little bit later because, I know how you are. Now, I don't know how realistic that is for teachers, but follow me with the example here, right? So you have to be flexible. Or let's maybe use a spouse example, right? So you have an expectation that your spouse, male or female, is going to do the dishes while you're gone, right? You get home, you realize the dishes aren't clean, and the first thing you come to your mind is, I expected you to do this while I was gone. You said you were going to do this while I was gone. You didn't do it while I was gone. Take a step back. Okay, go back a little bit, Okay, if there's a lot of stuff going on at home, was it realistic for you to ask that question? Can you be flexible here? Yes, you can be flexible. Think about the things that are surrounding the situation. I open up in the opening about how our expectations have a mental impact on someone. Think about those things. So before you get into your spouse, again, male or female, before you get into your spouse, think about some of those things and then say, okay, all right, didn't get done. I can be flexible. Let's move on. Now, I'll tell you, it's not always easy. I don't always do it. Other people don't always do it, but I am giving you tips and things that'll help you work on this. All right. So tip number 4 is actually what we were just talking about is consider the other person. Consider how they feel when they can't meet the expectation. This is something that I work on personally. I try to be more understanding when someone says they absolutely can't meet the expectation that I set out. Because what's real is just because you can meet it pretty easily doesn't mean that everybody else can meet it that easily, right? And that's one of the most annoying things when you have to deal with other people because they put their standards on you, right? So they think, well, if I can do it, you should be able to do it. Or if I did it this quickly, you should be able to do it this quickly. And that's not how the human brain works. And we're not cookie cutter. Some of us take a little bit more time to process things. Some of us take a little bit more time to understand things. And the moment you can't understand something, people immediately think, okay, well, this person just doesn't get it. This person is not smart. This person is not that. These are all these expectations. I expect you to get it. I expect you to do it. I expect to show you one time. I expect you to get it the first time I show you. Again, one of those things I deal with, especially, with my son, he plays basketball. So, I expect him to go and do training on his own, but that doesn't always happen. So you have to consider how that person feels on that side and how not being able to meet that expectation, especially for someone that they love and care about, you got to understand how that makes them feel. Now, that person has to own up to whatever it is that they can't do and not, make different excuses. But if they truly understand where you're coming from and they truly, genuinely feel like they can't meet that expectation, then that's something that they have to evaluate about themselves. And they have to be able to come to grips and just be honest with you and say, hey, I can't meet that expectation. And you have to be generous and you have to be courteous to that person to say, okay, I understand. Right? So tip number 5, okay? We have to stop making it about ourselves. We have to stop making it about ourselves. Oftentimes, and I alluded to this just now, oftentimes we say, I expected you to do this. I thought you were going to do that. I, right? But we have to be careful because that I in any type of interaction like this has to become a we. It has to become a we, right? We agree to this. Can we see it this way? Can we do it this way? Can we, going back to that flexible thing, right? With these expectations. So we have to not make it about us. Oh, you don't care because you didn't do what I asked you to do. you don't want to do this because I have to ask you to do it over and over. These are the kind of things that we say to each other. And that's just what it is. One of the scriptures, says hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. And disappointment from expectations makes us feel really bad. And that's just what it is. So listen, I'm going to run back over these tips. First, you have to evaluate your expectations. Make sure you're making these expectations realistic. You have to take some time to evaluate what it is that you really want out of this expectation. After evaluating, you have to find these areas where you can be flexible, right? So, okay, is it realistic? If it's not realistic, where can I be flexible in that? Number 4, you have to consider the other person. You have to consider what that does to them emotionally when they can't meet the expectation, right? And then number 5 is, stop making it about you. I did this, I did that, make it about we. We want to do this, we want to do that, we want to accomplish this, we want to accomplish that. And that applies anywhere, really, that you go. Now, last bonus thing about our self-expectation, how we expect so much from ourselves. And I am on social media a lot, I won't lie. And I see a lot of people who beat themselves up. So, I'll hear people and they'll say something like, okay, well, I'm on the beach. Oh, here's a picture of a whale on the beach. That's me. Ha ha. I didn't meet my goals. And, sometimes we have to evaluate these things and we got to say, we don't need to be that hard on ourselves. Okay, you didn't lose 100 pounds in 3 months. But you have to look back and say, okay, well, what was my goal? Like, why am I beating myself up so much because I didn't reach my goal for the summer? And you have to go back and you evaluate, okay, was my goal realistic? Well, I said I wanted to lose 100 pounds in 3 months. Okay, that probably wasn't very realistic. You have to take some time out to see what you really want. That's step number 2. Okay, what do I really want? Do I want a body that I can put on a magazine cover? Or do I want a body that I can feel confident walking outside with? Do I have to have 6-pack abs? Do I have to have a slim waistline? Do I have to have those things to be confident? So when you're thinking about those things, and I'm talking about like people with beach summer goals, that I've seen on social media, do you have to meet all those things, right? Do you have to, is that really what you want out of this? And then number 3, well, what is the flexibility? Are you gonna just eat green beans for the next 6 months? Are you gonna just eat protein powder for the next 6 months? No, give yourself some flexibility. When I lost my weight, it was so much easier to just go along as I got along. And as I went on, I started to learn new things that I liked. I started to learn new things that worked for me. Go back, consider now in this situation, you won't do step 4 because you're evaluating yourself. But go and look at how this is emotionally impacting you. Like, it's causing you great stress that you can't reach your goals. And part of the reason why you can't reach your goal is because of the hormone being released through all of the stress. That is something that you have to think about. So how is it impacting you mentally and emotionally? And, going back, now in this number 5 is a little different. Stop making it about you. It is about you. Manage your own expectations about yourself. Listen, I want to thank you guys for listening in. I hope you learned something about managing your expectations. I am your host, Luke Burke. This is the Candidly Speaking Podcast. I hope to see you soon. Thanks for watching.